Hello! When we talk about memory, we usually think of remembering, preserving information, storing experiences, keeping our past alive. But memory has a darker, often overlooked side: forgetting. So, is forgetting really a deficiency, or is it an indispensable mechanism in the way the mind works? Chasing this question is not only essential to understanding our individual lives, but also to grasping the deepest workings of the human brain. What is memory? The synaptic traces that shape our experiences. Memory is not just about recalling the past. It is a central mental function that defines who we are, how we think, and how we perceive the world around us. From a neuroscientific perspective, memory becomes possible through the plasticity of synaptic connections between neurons. Every experience leaves a mark on the brain's electrical and chemical structure. These marks are consolidated, weakened, or erased as synaptic pathways. These processes are described in terms of encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. Memory systems are multi-layered. Sensory memory processes incoming information from the environment within milliseconds. Working memory actively manipulates information and holds it for short periods. Long-term memory can store information for days, years, or even a lifetime. Within these systems, declarative, explicit memory depends on conscious recall and divides into two main types: episodic memory, personal experiences and events; semantic memory, general knowledge, concepts, and facts. Procedural, implicit memory, by contrast, stores motor skills and habits that operate without conscious awareness, like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. One of the most critical structures in the formation of memories is the hippocampus. It plays a central role in encoding information and transferring it into long-term memory, and is especially indispensable for forming new memories. The amygdala is involved in processing emotional memories, while the prefrontal cortex helps order, update, and integrate memories into decision-making processes. Yet memory is not a fixed, perfectly archived database. Thanks to neuroplasticity, every act of remembering also reshapes the memory itself. Frequently recalled events gain stronger synaptic connections, while neglected information can fade through long-term depression, a process of synaptic weakening. Modern research shows that even recollection triggers reconsolidation. When we remember something, the memory briefly becomes malleable again and can be modified before it is stored once more. This demonstrates that memories are not static records, but dynamic structures, recrafted each time they are retrieved. Memory, in this sense, is not just a tool for storing the past, but also for interpreting and rewriting it. The mechanism of forgetting: synaptic pruning and neural selectivity. Forgetting is not, as commonly assumed, a malfunction. It is an indispensable process for the brain's efficiency. Neuroscience is quite clear on this point. The brain learns by forgetting. To process new information, distinguish what matters from what does not, and use mental energy efficiently, some information must be cleared away. Two key mechanisms underpin this: synaptic pruning and neural selectivity. Synaptic pruning. During childhood and adolescence, the brain forms billions of synaptic connections, but not all of these connections are meant to last. Unused, weak, or unnecessary synapses are gradually removed by microglia, specialized immune cells in the brain. It is, in many ways, like pruning a garden. By trimming away redundant branches, the brain preserves the stronger, frequently used pathways and thereby improves cognitive performance. This neuroplastic process is as active in forgetting as it is in learning. For example, when you learn a new language but fail to rehearse the vocabulary, you eventually forget it. Because the synaptic pathways associated with those words are no longer used, the brain deems them unnecessary and prunes them. Forgetting here is not a passive loss, but something akin to an active decision. Neural selectivity. The brain is also highly selective about what it considers important. Emotionally charged events, life-changing decisions, and repeatedly encountered information strengthen synaptic pathways, while the mundane and irrelevant fade quickly. This filtering reduces cognitive load and helps preserve mental flexibility. Some forms of forgetting are protective. The suppression of traumatic memories can function as a defense mechanism, shielding the individual from psychological collapse. This type of forgetting operates beneath conscious awareness and serves a clear purpose: to preserve psychic integrity. In short, forgetting is not the opposite of learning. It is an integral part of it. To erase one thing is to make room for another. The brain prefers to work with less but better. Unconscious forgetting, repression, denial, and defense mechanisms. The human mind does more than merely gather information. It also selects, reshapes, and, when necessary, erases it. And this erasure is not always the result of conscious choice. In the darker corridors of the psyche, there are things we forget without ever deciding to. This is where unconscious forgetting comes into play. In the psychoanalytic tradition pioneered by Sigmund Freud, forgetting is not seen merely as a cognitive defect, but also as a defensive strategy. The mechanism of repression allows individuals to push painful, anxiety-provoking, or guilt-laden experiences below the threshold of consciousness. These repressed memories do not vanish. They persist in the unconscious and may surface indirectly through dreams, slips of the tongue, phobias, or psychosomatic symptoms. Denial is another defense mechanism. Instead of repressing a memory, the person refuses to accept the reality of what is happening or has happened. This mechanism often emerges in the face of traumatic losses, serious illnesses, or drastic life changes. The thought, "This cannot be happening to me," can evolve into a sustained mental stance, a constructed reality that shields the psyche from intolerable truths. Modern psychology and neuroscience suggest that these phenomena are not merely theoretical. In individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, for example, Some memories appear to be processed differently and may not be properly encoded into hippocampal memory. Excessive activation of the amygdala during extreme threat can prevent experiences from being stored as coherent, chronological narratives. Instead, the events may be preserved as fragmented, emotionally charged images. As a result, the person may struggle to recall the event clearly, or remember it only in broken pieces. Unconscious forgetting also operates at the collective level. Shameful or painful historical events can be silenced in a society's shared memory. Certain traumas are buried, not only in individual minds but in the unconscious of entire communities. Here, Michel Foucault's analyses of power and knowledge come to mind. Societies decide not only what must be remembered, but also what must be forgotten. The experiences that are silenced, excluded, or made taboo are not just removed from public discourse. They are pushed into the collective unconscious. These layered defensive strategies help maintain psychological balance, but they can also prevent genuine healing. Many therapeutic processes aim precisely to bring repressed memories safely into awareness, so they can be processed and integrated. Thus, unconscious forgetting is at once a neurobiological reality, a psychodynamic defense, and a social construct. Sometimes forgetting protects better than remembering. Yet every unprocessed memory stored in the shadows of the unconscious continues to exert quiet power. Trauma and memory. Memories buried in silence. Trauma is not only powerful at the moment it occurs, it remains powerful even when it is not remembered. Under the weight of intense emotional load, the brain deviates from its usual memory pathways. This deviation may lead either to an inability to recall the experience or to its involuntary and distressing re-experiencing. In people with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic memories are often incomplete, fragmented, or seemingly inaccessible. The reason is that during trauma, the brain processing takes an abnormal route. The hippocampus, responsible for organizing memories in time and space, becomes disrupted, while the amygdala, which governs fear and survival responses, becomes hyperactive. The result? The memory is not stored as a coherent story, but as scattered, disjointed emotional fragments. Some traumas are pushed even deeper, fully or partially repressed, particularly in cases of childhood abuse or large-scale disasters. The mind may protect itself by banishing the experience outside the reach of ordinary recall. The event is not gone. It lives on as bodily tension, nightmares, sudden panic, or incomprehensible emotional reactions. Trauma is not only individual, it is also collective. Wars, genocides, forced migrations, and political violence can all become buried in a society's shared memory through silence and denial. These events are transmitted across generations, shaping the emotional landscape of descendants. This phenomenon, often called transgenerational trauma or intergenerational memory, shows how unprocessed pain can echo beyond the lifetime of those who directly experienced it. Forgetting after trauma can act as a survival strategy at the neurobiological level. But in the long run, it comes at a price. Repressed memories can resurface as sudden rage, chronic anxiety, avoidance, or a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. That is why modern psychotherapies aim not simply to recall the memory, but to reorganize its emotional charge. Certain therapies, such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and trauma-focused cognitive therapy, seek to move traumatic experiences into regular autobiographical memory and to neutralize their intensity. In this process, individuals often face their past with a coherent narrative for the first time. In the end, traumatic memories are usually silent, but not erased. The events we do not want to remember turn into burdens we can still feel. Silence can sometimes protect, but more often, it becomes the greatest barrier to healing. The quiet cries stored in the darker corners of memory wait for the moment and the safe space in which they can finally be heard. Forgetfulness or protection. The brain's selective perception. Forgetfulness is often perceived as a mental weakness, but it can also be the brain's conscious or unconscious strategy. Not remembering something is not always a defect. Sometimes it is a deliberate way of preserving mental health. Seen from this angle, forgetting is not merely a loss. It is also a form of protection. The brain's capacity to handle information is limited. Every day we are bombarded by thousands of stimuli, images, sounds, sensations, words. If we remembered all of them equally, we would be overwhelmed by cognitive overload. So the brain prioritizes. It stores some information according to importance and allows other material to fade. This process involves selective attention and preferential encoding. Theories of adaptive forgetting propose that the brain tends to erase not only trivial information, but also memories that are heavily charged or potentially destabilizing, especially memories that threaten an individual's psychological balance may gradually blur. This mechanism works like a kind of mental immune system, helping people carry on. A related process is perceptual filtering. The brain tends to keep only information that has been repeated, emotionally marked, or meaningfully connected. Names, dates, and faces often vanish quickly if they are not reinforced. In contrast, events loaded with strong emotions can remain vivid for years. Ironically, forgetting can sometimes be more valuable than remembering. Constantly reliving losses, humiliations, and disappointments could hold a person in a permanent state of emotional arousal. Forgetting, in such cases, offers an opportunity to start again. Yet there is a fine line. While forgetting can be healing, it may also delay necessary confrontation. In therapy, the goal is not only to retrieve memories, but also to craft a healthier relationship with them. Forgetting is also tied to energy efficiency. Creating and maintaining memories is metabolically expensive. To save energy, the brain weakens underused synaptic pathways. Connections are pruned. This mechanism determines learning and forgetting in equal measure. In the end, forgetfulness is not always a deficiency, but often a subtle choice made by the brain. What we forget is as defining as what we remember. Memory is not a neutral storage device. It is a system that protects, filters, and shapes our identity. Forgetting as disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, and neurodegeneration. So far, we have seen how forgetting can be natural and even protective. But at times, this process spirals out of control and becomes pathological. The brain's ability to store, process, and retrieve information breaks down. The person loses not only new experiences, but also the memories that once defined them. This is no longer ordinary forgetfulness, but a neurological disorder. Alzheimer's disease is one of the most common neurodegenerative illnesses of our age, often mistaken for normal aging. Yet Alzheimer's is not merely age-related decline. It is a progressive condition marked by the death of brain cells. Protein accumulations, beta-amyloid plaques, and tau tangles disrupt communication between neurons, particularly in the hippocampus and cortical regions, eventually causing brain atrophy. This process does not just erase memory, it also impairs language, spatial orientation, judgment, and basic daily functioning. In early stages, a person may forget where they put their keys or struggle to recall dates. In advanced stages, they may fail to recognize loved ones, lose their sense of self, and become unable to perform simple tasks. Dementia is a broader umbrella term that includes Alzheimer's, but also other conditions such as vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. Each type affects different brain regions and produces distinct patterns of forgetting. For example, frontotemporal dementia often begins with personality changes, while vascular dementia may present with sudden drops in cognitive functioning. The causes of neurodegenerative diseases remain only partially understood. Genetic predisposition, lifestyle, diet, sleep quality, and chronic stress are all believed to play a role. For instance, carriers of the APOE4 gene have an elevated risk of Alzheimer's. Long-term depression, loneliness, and low levels of education are also associated with faster cognitive decline. Modern medicine does not yet have a definitive cure. Some drugs can slow the progression of symptoms, and cognitive training and memory exercises can help maintain quality of life. Social engagement, continued learning, and physical activity support neuroplasticity and may delay deterioration. Pathological forgetfulness is not just an individual challenge, it is a social one. With aging populations, dementia cases are increasing worldwide, placing heavy emotional and economic burdens on caregivers and health systems. Thus, forgetting in this context must be understood not only as a personal issue, but as a public health and policy concern. Memory in the digital age, externalized remembrance, and data amnesia. Today, our memories live not only in our brains but also in our devices. Photo albums, notes, contacts, birthdays, almost everything is stored on digital platforms a tap away. This convenience lightens our mental load, but it is fundamentally reshaping how memory works. Cognitive psychologists call this the Google effect. Knowing that information is easily accessible online reduces our motivation to remember it. The brain shifts its focus from retaining content to remembering how to access that content. Memory becomes outsourced to external systems, phones, cloud services, and digital archives. This ease, however, introduces a new type of forgetting. Studies show that people who take many photos of an event often remember the event itself less vividly. Because the brain knows the moment is recorded, it reduces attentional depth. This is sometimes referred to as the photo-taking impairment effect. Experience is outsourced to images. The memory becomes more about the snapshot than the lived moment. Constant digital interruptions also challenge short-term memory. Notifications, multitasking, and rapid content switching fragment attention. The mind remains on the surface, never staying long enough with information to encode it deeply into long-term memory. It is as if our memory is continually running in restart mode. Another risk is data-dependent forgetting. We no longer memorize passwords, addresses, or everyday details. We rely on devices to remember for us. When systems fail, when a device is lost, a file erased, or a platform shut down, our access to these externalized memories can vanish. The dependency itself creates a new kind of vulnerability. Some researchers describe this as a potential digital amnesia. Over-reliance on technology may be weakening internal memory habits. For some, this could be seen as an evolutionary adaptation to a hyper-informational world. For others, it is a warning sign. Ultimately, the issue is not technology alone, but meaning. The key question becomes, is it more valuable to remember or simply to access at the right time? Our minds are increasingly less filled with stored content and more filled with routes toward content. This new model of memory does not just change what we forget, it prompts us to rethink what it means to remember at all. Collective forgetting. When societies erase their own memory, forgetting is not only an individual defense mechanism, it also operates at the level of societies. Just as individuals repress painful experiences, communities can silence, distort, or erase parts of their past. This phenomenon is called collective forgetting, and it is often not passive, but organized. Throughout history, many nations have preferred not to confront their darkest chapters. Genocides, coups, forced displacements, colonial violence, systemic discrimination. Some of these barely appear in official histories. Others are edited, romanticized, or recast as heroic narratives. This is not just a gap in memory. It is the deliberate organization of oblivion. Collective memory is shaped by museums, monuments, school curricula, and media narratives. These institutions and practices decide what will be remembered and what will not. Silenced testimonies, missing documents, and taboo topics narrow and distort a society's understanding of its own past. Sometimes collective forgetting is framed as a strategy for healing, calls to let the past rest, avoid reopening old wounds, or turn the page for the sake of unity, are presented as paths to peace. Yet such silence rarely heals. More often, it deepens the unresolved trauma. Societies that do not confront their past are prone to repeat it. In contrast, some countries have pursued a politics of remembrance. Truth commissions, public apologies, and historical reckonings. These are attempts not only to restore justice, but also to build a healthier collective memory. Because what is forgotten does not simply disappear. It returns, often in more destructive forms: anger, denial, or renewed conflict. Memory is not just about carrying the past. It is about building the future. Protecting collective memory is therefore not only the task of historians, but a shared civic responsibility. A society that loses its memory risks losing its identity as well. Forgetting in art and literature. Forgetting is not only a cognitive void, it is also an artistic motif, a narrative device, and a lens through which we explore the human condition. Art and literature offer some of the most creative reflections on the fragility of memory, the erosion of recollection, and the transformation of the past in our minds. Forgetting, no less than remembering, is a powerful emotional and intellectual theme. In literature, countless works revolve around memory and its loss. Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time portrays how memory oscillates between forgetting and recollection, with tastes and smells triggering deeply buried experiences. Jorge Luis Borges's story, Funes the Memorious, presents a man who forgets nothing and suffers under the unbearable weight of total recall. His condition reminds us how essential forgetting is for mental balance. Cinema also uses memory loss as a dramatic core. Christopher Nolan's Memento tells a story of amnesia in reverse chronology, structurally embodying the disintegration of memory. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind examines the idea of deliberately erasing memories, raising questions about emotional trauma and the true value of painful experiences. These works invite us to question not just forgetting, but the burden of remembering. Visual arts, music, and theater create similar tensions between memory and oblivion. In modern and contemporary art, blank spaces, erased figures, blurred images, and repeated motifs can all evoke forgetting. Artists often use absence and silence to represent what cannot be fully expressed. It is an attempt to depict the unsayable. Art's interest in forgetting extends to collective memory as well. Post-war literature, memorial art, and documentary theater frequently tackle shared traumas, suppressed histories, and enforced silences. In this sense, art does not simply remind, it becomes a witness to what has been pushed into oblivion. Ultimately, art and literature show that forgetting has narrative value. The void left by memory can itself become a form of expression. Sometimes realizing that we have forgotten something is a more powerful experience than remembering it in full. The evolution of forgetting, a necessary flaw for survival. The human mind is highly skilled at storing information, but just as skilled and just as unconsciously at erasing it. At first glance, this may look like a flaw. Yet evolutionary biology and neuropsychology suggest that forgetting is, in fact, an adaptive strategy crucial for survival. For living beings to survive, they must respond appropriately to a changing environment. If every single experience, piece of information, and emotion were permanently retained, the result would not be perfect knowledge, but cognitive chaos. Forgetting allows the brain to manage information, discarding what is outdated or irrelevant to focus on what matters now. Much like a computer clearing its cache, the human brain reduces noise through synaptic pruning, eliminating weak, useless, or emotionally harmful traces. This does more than save energy. It optimizes attention, decision-making, and adaptability. Forgetting is also central to psychological well-being. When traumatic memories remain as raw and vivid as the day they occurred, they can dominate a person's mental life. In individuals with hyperthymesia, extraordinary autobiographical memory, the inability to forget can become almost unbearable. These individuals can be trapped in their past, struggling to engage with the present. A brain that remembers everything is less a gift than a curse. From an evolutionary standpoint, forgetting also provides flexibility. Past experiences are not always relevant to current conditions. Letting outdated patterns fade makes it easier to adapt to new environments, relationships, and roles. Forgetting functions as a kind of cognitive cleaning, essential for development and social functioning. In the end, forgetting is not a defective side effect, but a biological necessity. The selectivity of memory is what makes learning and ongoing life possible. The deepest strength of the human mind may not lie in its capacity to remember everything, but in its ability to forget the right things. Memory is one of the most precious gifts of being human. But we cannot truly understand memory without talking about forgetting. Forgetting may look like a mistake or a deficiency, yet it is indispensable for the sustainability of life. While the brain protects the past, it also clears what is unnecessary, suppresses overwhelming experiences, and lightens emotional burdens. If we remembered everything, we would not survive better. We would be paralyzed. When forgetting becomes disease, it signals collapse. But in its natural and evolutionary form, forgetting is a selective wisdom. The human mind needs forgetting no less than it needs remembering. For who we are is shaped not only by the memories we keep, but also by what we leave behind. Perhaps, instead of fearing forgetting, we should try to understand the balance it brings to our lives. Memory does not merely store the past, it helps us build the future. And sometimes, the healthiest way to remember is to learn how to embrace forgetting as well.